Hello, everyone. How are you? I hope all is well as this week, we mark the end of, our liturgical calendar cycle, a whole church year. And so next week, the first week of Advent, we will be starting. It's hard to believe it, right? We will be wearing the purple, or the celebrants will be wearing the purple, and the altar cloths will be purple to remind us to celebrate with us in symbolizing Advent. But we're still here in at the solemnity of Christ the King, which we celebrate this coming Sunday. This is a very interesting layout of readings because the first reading has to do with David, the king, who was not perfect by any means, but certainly a very interesting story. And Jesus, comes, we're told, from the lineage of David, and but it's an important story to know. I encourage you to read it when you can, um, in the second book of Samuel, and just you want to know more about him because as a leader and as a young shepherd, he really came from nothing and becomes this king of the Israelites. So it's again a very interesting story to read, and also to know that David, um, we think, is the author of the Psalms that we have some of our favorites, the all 150, and especially this Sunday, let us go rejoicing to the house of the Lord is the refrain. So there's some joy there because when you get to the gospel, it's all of a sudden it feels like it should be Easter. We're talking about Jesus hanging on the cross, Jesus suffering, Jesus, in Luke's gospel with the thief on each side. So how did we get there? How did we get to this feeling of, Christ the King and kingship in terms of David? How do we get to Jesus hanging on the cross with these two thieves? Um, the important thing to know is that when the Jews were expecting the Messiah, they were expecting king and someone who will take care of everything, all the suffering they had, and that all of this would be ended. But as we know, that didn't happen that way. And so it's good to know and to make the differentiation, especially with those we teach, those young people, in terms of what is a king, what is a leader, who is Jesus, and how does Jesus fit into all this? We're calling him a king this week. Why do we do that? Well, we're remembering him on the cross and what he did in sacrifice for all of us, telling one of the thieves, "You will be with me today in paradise." And I think we should meditate on that. Well, I know I like to meditate on Jesus's words to the thief, that you will be with me today in paradise. What does that mean? And what does that mean to me personally? I don't know how the children would handle that, but at the same time, with the children, I think we need to make the distinction. What is a king as we know it? And what is the leader? Who was Jesus? Uh, we're calling Jesus this Sunday, the king, Christ the King, because on the top of a cross, you will see the four letters, or crucifix, actually. It was a cross when they put it on for Jesus, INRI, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. He started out thinking that this person was a king in the way we know it in the worldly sense. That's not what Jesus was about. Jesus wasn't about power, he was about authority. And there's a big difference there. Power could be very ego-centered. It could be damage causing, so to speak. Uh, but authority is very different. Authority comes from something bigger than us, and it's anointed with us. And that is the difference between Jesus and the King. Jesus reigns over the kingdom, the reign of God, very different from reigning over a country or a group of people. Jesus doesn't do it that way. Jesus doesn't use power. Jesus uses his authority. And as we know from the gospel and from Isaiah, Jesus is anointed by God to do this. It might be a good idea to talk to people, your kids, your young disciples this week about Jesus as king. What does that mean? Like I just said, as king of the Jews. What does that all entail, especially for the um, older kids you teach? They can get a better handle on it. They also could get a good handle on what is a leader. And I always think that should be just talked about. What are the qualities of a good leader? What do they do? What does Jesus do as a leader? Uh, Jesus and all his other qualities, and something to think about and to pray about, so it could be revealed to you. Basically, Jesus is not about Jesus. Jesus is about the other, and that's who we should be, about the other. It's not for us, it's for the others, that a good leader leads people. For younger children, of course, they know about kings. They may know about kings through stories and all of that, and trying to give them clarity with that could be a little difficult, especially when all of a sudden the gospel is about being on the cross for Jesus. And, that could cause some confusion. As I said, we think it's like Easter time. Like, why is this? But the emphasis is on Jesus is not a king. Jesus is not who people thought he was going to be. And in doing this, Jesus shows us love and through his care for people. That's a leader. So in those gentler ways to teach the younger children, even the older children, they're looking at Jesus as a loving leader of God's people, and trying to teach them and letting them know who God is for all of us, and knowing that God is always with us. So I would definitely, look at these readings, especially read about David. I think it's an interesting story uh, in the Old Testament. And may we go rejoicing to Jerusalem, as we think about um, the gift we have in Jesus in terms of his leadership over the reign of God, uh, and that we belong to that, and how blessed we are to belong in that community. So have a good week. Prepare now next week for Advent, and we'll be starting a new cycle. Like I said, we'll be going to cycle A starting next week. So blessings to you and to your family as we get into preparation for Advent.